Welcome to the Stories Create Moments podcast, the podcast where we talk about how stories and books can help children connect with themselves, their peers, their communities, and the world. Today we have a real treat. Our guest is Kiri Jorgensen, the publisher and senior editor of Chicken Scratch Books. Kiri has a long history of engaging with middle grade books. As a mom, a teacher, a writer, a playwright, and now a publisher. She also teaches the craft of writing through online courses. Welcome, Kiri, and thank you for joining me today. As a fellow lover of middle grade books, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey that's gotten you to where you are today?
Sure. Yes, it's been an interesting journey. I never intended to be a publisher. I've been a writer my whole life. Since I was just a young child, I've written and written and written and reading and reading and reading. Those have been huge parts of my life. As I got older, I used writing in different ways. I became a public school teacher. I taught in public school, private school situations, homeschool. I've done the whole gamut of teaching. I'm a teacher at heart. But through it all, I was writing. I was part of the writing world. I started doing freelance editing. I started working with writing organizations, and besides just teaching writing, held some leadership positions in writing organizations, and I got to understand the industry kind of from the backside as well as from the front side. And then from there, I started noticing shifts and changes, partially because of being a teacher and partially because of being a mom to my 4 kids. I started noticing the quality of writing and the content that was being included in middle grade fiction. Middle grade is my specialty. It's my passion. It's where I have spent all of my years as a writer, as an editor. That's where I've lived, in that middle grade world. And so when I started seeing how the industry was shifting and changing, I was quite disturbed by that. I understood that there are still so many families and so many kids who truly want and need clean content that doesn't include social agendas, and yet those books were no longer being published. And so there was one day I was feeling so frustrated as I was tracking this shift and change in the industry, and I was ranting to my husband about how somebody needs to do something about this. And he stopped, and there was that pause of silence, and he looked at me and said, "Kiri, maybe you need to do something about this." And so that's where Chicken Scratch Books was born. From there, we plotted and schemed, and as a couple, we have a history of entrepreneurship. And so I've had my hands involved in businesses for a long time. And so it wasn't hugely daunting to start a business, although it was hugely daunting to start a business. I sort of knew what I was doing. I knew just enough to be dangerous, but it's been a wonderful journey. We just published our first book in March of 2021. And now by the end of the year, we'll have 27 titles out. All of them are middle grade fiction, all different genres, all different authors. Very fun process that I've been able to be a part of. But that's, in a nutshell, what my journey has been from the beginning to where I am now. And I'm loving it.
I think that's amazing. I love that your husband encouraged you to do something about this problem that you saw coming into middle grade fiction, which I noticed the shift too, just in the last probably 10 years is what I've seen. I actually...
Yes, that's been the most visible.
I wanted to read one of the books from your publishing company before I met with you, so I bought Raleigh Peters and the Lumberjack Ghost, and I really loved this book. It was fun, it was engaging, and I know it's geared towards younger middle grade readers, and it was just a really delightful story. I would love to
It's a fun one.
know.
I love finding authors. I love working with authors.
Yes, and you said you have 26 books. 26?
27. By the end of the year, we will have
27.
27 out.
Wow, that's really, really fun. I'm looking forward to reading more. I know you talked about your journey that led you into publishing, and I know that as a mom, a teacher, and a writer, you love to connect with others through stories and books. What was a foundational experience or time in your life that helped you realize the power of connecting through stories and books?
I've had so many experiences like that. I thought of one in particular when I was a child. I was laying in my bed in my room reading, which was a super common thing. I think it was late in the night, and I finished reading the book Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred Taylor. That was a book that completely impacted me in ways that are pivotal in my world, in my worldview. As I read that book and finished it that night, that vivid memory that I was laying there in my bed and I was just sobbing. I was crying. It was such a moving story, a very touching, impactful story. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, I was probably 10. Wow, this book has changed me. It's helped me understand the world in a whole new way that I didn't have before. And it impacted me not only intellectually, but emotionally. And I recognized, even at a young age, in that moment, that stories have power. They have power to impact and to influence people. And partially, I think, because of that experience, that's why I've been so focused myself on middle grade books for that age category, because that is such an incredibly vulnerable age, and it's an age when kids are so influenced. They're voraciously learning about the world around them and figuring out how they fit into that world. And yet, books can have an incredible impact, and I've seen it for positive or for negative with kids as they read. Books are impactful to them, and I got to experience that myself when I was very young.
That was a really, really powerful book. I listened to that one last year for the first time. I'd never read it before, and I loved it. And it was really impactful for me, too, as an adult. But I can imagine as a 10-year-old, it was really, really impactful. How, as you became a teacher and a mom, how did that foundational experience and other experiences that you had with books influence the way you taught and interacted with kids through stories and books?
I just feel like, because of my experience as a writer and as an editor over the years that I was teaching, and then as well as a mom, I would often use books to steer my students or steer my kids in a certain direction, one way or another, to help teach them, because I knew the influence it could have on them. And so I was always looking for opportunities to present specific books to specific kids to guide them in their worldview building experiences in their lives. I remember, and it's not just for the emotional side of things. It's also very much for the intellectual side. I remember one experience that I had with a student that was really powerful for me. I always did read alouds to my classrooms, and I was teaching in a middle school at this time. There was a student who really didn't like to read. He often would tell me, "I don't like to read. I don't want to read. I'm not interested in stories." And but he would always listen to the read alouds. He was always engaged as we were reading these read alouds. And there was one particular book I was reading to the kids. Fantastic historical fiction. It's called, all of a sudden my mind went blank. It's by Dan Gemeinhart, and it is the story about a boy looking for his stolen horse. And a wonderful little historical story. And that's why I was reading out loud. I loved the book. Anyway, I'm reading to the class, and I come to a part in the book that is very emotional, and I'm an emotional reader. If there's a sad part in the story, I cry. If there's a happy part in the story, I cry. And it doesn't matter if I'm reading it personally or if I'm reading it aloud. And I decided years ago that was okay. So here I am reading aloud this story. I get to a really sad part in this story, and I just start sobbing. I'm crying. I'm trying to read to my classroom. And this young man who doesn't like to read, he raised it, he says, "Mrs. Jorgensen, would you like me to read for a page or two while you collect yourself?" And I said, "I would love that." And so he came up to the front of the class, I handed him the book. He read for a page or two, and then I'm like, okay, I'm ready now. And so I could come back, and I finished reading for our read aloud for that day. That affected me, that I had a student who would do that. But the really interesting thing that happened is, as soon as we finished that read aloud book, that particular student came to me and he said, has that author written other books? I liked that book a lot. And so I handed him another book by that author. He ended up turning into a reader who would borrow books from me that I would recommend to him for the rest of that school year. And he was personally checking out from my personal library of books. Here's this student that told me he didn't like to read. And I really believe that because he saw me and experienced me having an emotional connection to a story, it changed his perspective of what a story can do for you. A book had never done that for him before. And then he got to experience that, yes, books can affect us emotionally. And it changed him as a reader. And so that was a really great experience for me too, to have as a teacher working with a student.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that story. Just the power that a teacher can have in influencing students and helping them love to learn reading and learn to love books. I want to share an experience back that my son had. He was in middle school and he loves science. He loves science. He'll read science books, weather books, but I wanted him to be more well-rounded, so I would encourage other books, and we had different ways we did that. But he had a class in 7th grade and they were reading And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And he kept talking about it at home. He kept talking about it. And then one day he said, because they would go through each person that was a suspect in the book and talk about it in class, but they weren't allowed to read ahead. So all these kids were talking about it at lunch, trying to figure out who the person was and these were 7th grade boys.
Who did it?
And yeah, and it was created this connection between them. It created this connection with literature, and it was really, really fun. So I think there's a lot of power that can come from teachers.
That is awesome.
Yes, you, when you were a teacher, created a writing curriculum for middle school students. What did that look like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. When I was teaching in public schools, I was always so frustrated with the reading and writing curriculums that were provided by the school that I often supplemented with my own things. I was in a school that my administration would let me do that. And I especially one year was so frustrated with the writing program that they wanted me to teach the kids. I thought, this is not going to teach the kids how to be writers. And I wanted to make sure that they learn how to be writers. And so I created a curriculum, and I created it over several years' time, but then I used it for many years past that. Essentially, I broke the school year down into 6 units of writing. There's one for nonfiction, there's one for narrative telling, there's one for expository writing, one for persuasive writing, one for fiction, nonfiction. Anyway, we had 6 different units of study that we would focus in on. And within that unit of study, we had what I called writing through pre-writing, is essentially what I called my curriculum. I learned over the years that with kids learning how to be writers, so often just giving them a prompt was not enough. They needed more understanding of how to brainstorm, how to come up with their own ideas. And so I created a series of weekly graphic organizers, essentially, that the kids would fill out based on a certain topic that they were focused on. And that would really help them understand their thinking, their own thoughts. And then from there, they would write it in a writing notebook, write whatever the topic was that they needed to write about for the week. And then at the end of the week, we would hold a writers' conference. And we would sit down at a table, usually with a small group, and the kids would share their writing that they'd written that week. And they would tape their graphic organizer into their writing binder, and then they'd have their writing on the next page or the next several pages. And we would sit down and each of the kids would share their writing with the group. I felt like that was a hugely important part of becoming a good writer, is to share your writing. And so I helped them by pre-writing, pre-planning, and then they got to share, and we would have feedback, but the feedback was always positive. We would have the kids talk about what was something you loved about this, what's something that really stood out to you that you loved about this writing. Because that was another thing that I realized. So many kids are killed by school as writers because they believe from a pretty young age that they are not good at writing. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because so often we, as teachers and as parents, assume that the mechanics of writing is what writing is about, not necessarily the creative side of writing. Ultimately, it has to be a marriage of the two, the mechanics and the creative. But we tend to focus, as with young kids, mostly on the mechanical side. And so by doing our writers' conferences, I never looked at spelling, I never looked at grammar, I never looked at any of that until the end of the unit, when they wrote a final writing topic on a topic about that unit. Then I would be checking for grammar and spelling and those things on that final piece. But the vast majority of their writing, I was focusing on nurturing that creative side. And some kids, oh man, you could barely read it because their spelling was so bad. But you could read it. And when they read it aloud, and then I got positive feedback from the group as well as me, the teacher, then it built them up in their confidence. And that was always really fun for me to watch students too, who at the beginning of the year, the very first writers conference that we have each year would be fraught with nervousness, and kids would be shaking and so scared to read their writing aloud. And then with it didn't take more than just a couple of weeks until they understood that, okay, this is a comfortable thing. This is kind of a thing, and there's going to be a positive outcome from it. And so lots of positive reinforcement geared specifically to their writing and the things that they were doing right in their writing. And so that's essentially what my curriculum was built from. Lots of writing, lots of sharing, lots of breaking down how we write the way we do, why we write the way we do. And then from there, just encouraging them and letting them see that they can write. They can write in lots of different ways and do good work in their writing.
Yes, that's fascinating. And so you had to take all the different writing focuses that they need, like you said, narrative, and then there's, persuasive and things like that. And so you created specific things for each of those to teach them, specific curriculum for each of those.
Yes.
To teach them. But it sounds like the foundation of all of it was encouraging this love of writing and connecting with words and connecting with each other through that and feeling that confidence. Did you ever have a student who you saw, you mentioned that there were several students that gained a lot of confidence in writing, but did you ever have a student that really grasped a hold of it? Can you share more about that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I definitely had over the years lots of students who basically discovered a love of writing through the process of these writers conferences and the curriculum that I used. Sometimes there were a handful of times over the years that I did this that I did have students come to me and say, "Mrs. Jorgensen, I want more. I want more writing. How can you help me? What can I do?" And of course, I would work individually with those students to go beyond what we were doing within the classroom and write full stories. I had a couple students who were even working on novels. They just were so excited about what they discovered and what they could do. And so lots of really fun things that we were able to work with through teaching kids how to write, which I love to do.
And I love that with your background in writing, you really had a solid foundation of story development and character and plot so that you could give them those resources that were valuable to them, the kids that wanted more. I know now you write,
yeah.
I know now you do video training for adults for writing. You have a couple of programs that you do. What is similar to teaching adults and children to write, and what's different? Because the writing process is the writing process, but what's similar and what's different about that?
Okay. When I teach kids how to write, it's very foundational and built on helping them learn how to let their creative juices flow, help them learn how to organize their thoughts, help them learn how to understand why you structure things the way you do, and then go from there. But it's very foundational, very basic. As I work with older students, teens or adults in their writing, we can get into a lot more specifics, a lot more details, a lot more nuance, a lot more depth of what is going to connect to your readers in what you write, what really is going to stand out. I mean, you got to first understand how to bring this creativity and these thoughts onto the page. But from there, as adults, older writers and adults, you have to learn how to fine tune what's on the page, how to shape it in a way that is going to connect with readers, whatever age that is. With plot structures and character arcs and all those things. How are you going to form this story so that it's going to engage and connect with your reader? So I get to go into a lot more depth with the adults, which is also very fun. I love teaching both ends of it. It's a lot going on in the writing process.
Yes, I've been learning about writing for the past couple of years, and it is really fun when you start getting into when you can get into more detail and really dig into your character and find ways to connect the story to who will be reading it and develop that in a way that can show all of those things. So it's fun that you get to do that. It's fun that you get to teach people writing and connect with people that way. I love that. I've had parents ask me about resources for kids to help them learn to write. So I am wondering, from your perspective, what are a couple of things parents and teachers, you've already kind of talked about it from a teacher perspective, but from a parent perspective, what can parents do to help their children, if they see an interest in writing, develop that and turn that into a writing skill? And what are resources available for helping children learn to write?
I think the first step that parents need to recognize, and I see this a lot in the homeschool world, parents sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, you connect the mechanics of writing to writing. You think that's what writing is. And you see that your children, that as they are writing, you as an adult are seeing the mistakes that they're making, the mechanical mistakes that they're making in their story. And it's hard not to point those out. But the constant pointing out of all of those mechanical errors is what kills students, the child's love of writing. They see it turns into a chore rather than something that's fun to do. So for parents, I just think it's so important for you to nurture that love of writing more than the mechanics. Mechanics can be taught and learned during grammar time, during spelling time. And yes, writing is the application of all of those skills, but that can come as the skills progress. You're going to see it progress in the writing too. Don't worry about that in the writing in the early ages as you're working with your kids. Now, obviously, you as the parent and the teacher have to be aware of where it's going to be important to start. Okay, this mistake keeps happening, this grammar mistake. So that means I need to teach that specifically to my child, but teach it separate from their creative writing, whatever it is that they're writing. I think being able to separate the mechanics from the writing is kind of counterintuitive, but I think in some ways it's important if you've got a child that you really want to nurture that love of writing in. So that's some advice for parents. Let them write. Give them opportunities to write. Buy them pretty writing notebooks and fancy pens, and help them to understand that writing has power, that words have power. And when you use them well, you can tell stories and you can persuade and you can inform in ways that you can't using other mediums. Writing is very powerful. And so helping kids understand the benefit and the value of writing, not just to finish this assignment that mom's making me do or the teacher is making me do, but just that there is value beyond the assignment in learning how to use your words in powerful ways. So that's some advice. As far as resources go, I get asked that a lot, and there are not a lot of great answers for that. There are a few companies out there that provide kind of supplemental writing opportunities for kids. All of a sudden, I'm having a hard time with my brain. I think it's called the Children's Writing Institute. Is that? No, that's not right. There is an organization, and the reason I know about this organization is I don't know if you're familiar with Green Ember, the Green Ember series. It's a popular series, fantasy series for middle grade kids, and the author, S.D. Smith, is part of a reading organization that connects teen writers across the country online. And they have quarterly events where they get together and they write things together, and they have lessons and training. That's a great organization. I should have looked it up. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But if you look up S.D. Smith, the Green Ember, his website will tell all about that, because he's a part of it and he supports what they do for teen writers. And so there are some organizations like that out there for teen writers who want to improve their craft, want to have experience with writing and critiquing and working with other writers. And that experience is vital in order for kids to be able to continue to progress in their writing ability. They've got to get feedback. They have to learn how to recognize pros and cons of other writers' writing, and then they can apply it to themselves. So that's definitely someplace to look. And I apologize that I can't remember the name of that organization. It might come to me as we're talking.
That's okay. I will look it up and I'll put it in the notes for the show so people have access to that link. I think it's interesting that you said, well, you've mentioned it a couple of times in these two different contexts. When you were a teacher, you had kids give feedback to each other. and you're saying that's critical for the writing process. And I know on the Scratch Books website, you talk about that the authors that you look for, one of the things that you encourage them to do is to be part of writers groups to get that feedback as well. And so that's a very, like you said, critical part of becoming a writer is getting feedback from others.
Yes, and then learning from that feedback, taking the feedback and considering it. No matter, I mean, so often as writers, we will write this awesome story, and then here's somebody critiquing it and telling us, well, I didn't really like this. This didn't really work. And your first response is defensiveness as a writer. Like, yeah, but it's so good. You just don't understand how good it is. That's your response as a writer. It's very natural, but you have to learn how to sit back, how to take that critique and consider every single piece of critique. And a good chunk of it you won't agree with and you won't do, and that's okay. But a good chunk of it you need to listen to. You need to consider. You need to look at the possibility of, well, what if I did do it like that instead? How would that change my story? Would it change it for the better? Would it change it for the worse? As writers, we need to learn how to consider other people's opinions in how to make our writing stronger. And as a writer, learning how to do that was pivotal in my own writing experiences. As soon as I learned how to take critique, listen to it, consider it, apply it, and then decide if it was going to be a good thing or not, that's when I really started making strides in the improvement of my stories. And so it's a vital piece that we all have to learn as writers, and a great time to start when you're a young writer. Start learning how to do that.
Yes, that's definitely a skill to learn. It's hard to take critique from others, but I can see the value for a couple of reasons. You can get in your own head and you can see something one way, but everyone reading, it might not make sense to people who are reading the way it makes sense to you. And also giving feedback to other people helps you learn too, because you're reading other people's writing and then you're learning from that experience as well. That was very, very fun talking about writing and some of your experience with that. And I want to talk a little bit about, I find so much value in using stories and books to connect with others, and especially kids. As we talked about earlier, the middle grade age is such a powerful time to use books and stories to help kids connect with themselves and to help them connect with their peers, with their communities, and with the world. And books teach so much in such a natural, fun way. And then when it's used in a school setting, you've got other kids that they're learning from each other and they have discussions about those books, and it's really, really powerful. If you could give teachers and parents one inspirational piece of advice about using books and stories to help kids connect with each other and the world, what would it be?
One thing that I love to talk to, I often give presentations and workshops at homeschool conventions. And one thing that I love to talk about with parents there, and this is obviously very applicable for teachers as well, is that every book is going to have gems that your students will connect with. Every book will have gems. It doesn't matter if it's a picture book, if it's a middle grade novel, if it's a young adult novel, whatever level of age category of book, it doesn't matter. What doesn't matter what genre. And so rather than focusing so much on making sure your child is understanding the comprehension of the story, although that's important too, focus on these gems instead. And the gems that I like to try to encourage parents to focus on are agency, arc, and associations. And I'll talk about those three real quickly. Agency is all about the choices that the main character is making. That's how, especially in middle grade, that's how readers connect to the story. It doesn't matter what the setting is, what the character is, what the culture represented is. All of that's interesting and all of that's fun and engaging. But what's going to make the reader connect is if they can relate to the choices the main character is making, why they're doing what they're doing in the story. And so when you're reading a book with a child, talk about the choices the main character is making. Talk about the consequences that came because of that choice. Talk about that with your children as you're reading this book. Talk about, why do you think they chose that? What's going to happen because of that choice? And then And then from there, you can move into the whole concept of arc. An arc is the character arc of change, how the character grows and changes their perspective about their world from the beginning of the book to the end of the book based on those choices that they made and what they learned from those choices. And so this is actually a really powerful gem that is largely overlooked when we look at using literature with kids. Talk about at the beginning of the book, after they've read the first third of the book, have a discussion with with your child and say, what does the main character feel about their family at this stage in the story? And they might say, well, she's pretty annoyed at her parents. They just keep saying things that really bug her. She's really annoyed at them. And you're like, yeah, I can see that in the story. That's what's happening. And then after they've read another third, say, how is the main character feeling about her family now? And the character say, well, it kind of shifted into anger. Now she's just angry at her parents about everything they're saying, and her sister's driving her nuts, and everybody's making her angry. And then you're like, yeah, I can see that in this story. And then at the end of the book, ask the same question again. How is the main character feeling about her family now? And then they will say, well, now she's really understanding and respecting what her parents are doing for her. And she and her sister have become best friends. And essentially what you've done by talking about this change as it's happening is you've shown your child positive change is possible, growth is possible, and that it can be something that they can internalize themselves. Growth and having a growth mindset is super important for these middle grade kids too. So tracking that character arc of change, how their perspective on their world shifts, is a super valuable gem. And it has nothing to do with really comprehension. It's all about those connections and that emotional connection to the main character's choices that are being made. And then the third gem I like to look at is associations. And that's just the relationships that the character has within the book. And how did the way they treat the other characters affect those relationships? Books are an excellent place to learn how to be a friend. You can see friendships that are positive and endearing friendships. You can see friendships that, maybe I can see why that's not going to be a great friendship to hang on to moving forward. Your child can learn about friendships and what that means and what it looks like in a very safe place. And so by looking more, when you're reading a story, yes, the plot is exciting. The activities that are happening, they're adventurous, they're fun. All these exciting things are going on. But what is the main character learning through the choices that they make? And how is that affecting the other characters around them? Those are the gems that are built into every story. So that's my big piece of advice. Look for the gems in literature. Every story has them to one level or another. And so help your kids see the gems in the story. That'll help them connect and appreciate the main character even more. And it will help them learn and understand things in new ways. And so, so that's a great way for parents and teachers to help their kids connect to the books that they're reading.
I love that. I love that you call those gems. And I love the intentional use of those three things that you talked about. Arc. The first one was agency, arc, and what was the last one?
Mm-hmm. Associations.
Associations. And I love that. I love the intentional use of those things. I've read books, especially with my daughter, who's 13 now. She loves to read books together. And it's helped her process things socially that happen in middle school. But I love the additional use of this intentional talking about the growth of the character through the book and how they feel at different times throughout the book and the growth that they have, the way that you talked about it. So I'm going to start doing that with her. And I'm going to share this,
awesome,
obviously, with the podcast, and I'll share it also in my Substack. I love that so much, and I'll credit you for that, but that's really, really wonderful idea. And Kiri, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me. I know that you're busy. I know that your time is valuable. I know that you have a lot of really great things that you're doing in your life. Can you tell the listeners, just in wrapping up, where can they find you? And what are some upcoming books, if you can talk about them, that are coming out through your publishing company?
Yes. Thank you. We are on chickenscratchbooks.com is our website. And on that website, we have all of our books. We also have, we mentioned it briefly, but we create online novel study courses, book study courses to go with every book that we publish. And so all those courses are also available on our website. We also have the writing side of things on the website. Amber mentioned that we have courses. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for writers. I encourage, if anybody's interested in writing, whether you're an adult or a child, a teen, I have what's called, well, I have two newsletters. My book letter is all about just the books we're publishing, and then my second newsletter is called the Write Letter. And my Write Letter is a weekly writing encouragement that comes out. There's a monthly theme that we follow. There's video instruction. There's worksheets that you download to help you with your own writing. And I get into some pretty deep nitty gritty over the course of 2 years worth of newsletters to learn about how to write middle grade fiction. So, but it's applicable to any kind of fiction. So I encourage you to sign up for my Write Letter if you're interested in writing, because I provide a lot of totally free instruction on how to become a better writer. I'm passionate about teaching writers. So that's all on my website, chickenscratchbooks.com. We are also, for our books themselves, we are distributed through Baker and Taylor Publisher Services. So our books are available anywhere books are sold. And we're a young company. And so I would encourage all of your listeners, all of your readers to request our books at your bookstores and at your libraries. They're available to anybody. But we're still relatively unknown. We're still building our name, Chicken Scratch Books. Anybody who would like to see good, strong, middle grade fiction that's clean and agenda free, you can request them for your bookstores and your libraries to bring our books in. So that's how you find us. That's where we are. And what was the second thing you wanted me to end with?
It was what books your publishing company has coming out. But before you talk about that, I just want to I also want to say how wonderful it is that I think that you offer so much education to writers through what you do. And I love the mission of your publishing company. You've also written books yourself, which we didn't talk about. Do you want to talk about that for a minute? The books that you've written.
Sure. Yes, sure. I have, over the years, I've written a lot. For a lot of years, I was trying to be published through mainstream publishers. I had an agent that was a big name agent out of New York. I thought I thought everything was going to be set, and my agent was unable to ever sell any of my manuscripts, which was disappointing, but it happens all the time. It's an extremely competitive world out there. I have five completed manuscripts, middle grade fiction, all of them different genres. Several are historical fiction because that's my personal favorite to write and to read. I love historical fiction, but also some contemporary. I just love to write, and it's something that I will always do. After I started Chicken Scratch, I never intended for Chicken Scratch to necessarily be a place for me to publish my own writing, but I did. I have published one of my books. It's called Perfect, and it was our 10th book that we published. I had a hole in my production schedule come up, and I thought, I'm just going to drop in one of my books. And so I did. I have one other of my 5 manuscripts that's kind of my heart story. I think all writers have a heart story that they absolutely love. And at some point, I would like to publish that one as well. But first, I have to find some time to rewrite it because I've learned a lot myself being an editor and a publisher, and I know some things I need to do to that book to make it even better. So it's all a learning process. But we do have some awesome books coming up. I'm always looking for having a broad range of interest and genres, just because we only publish middle grade fiction. And so I want to have as broad a variety of options for kids to read as we possibly can. So we've got our first science fiction is coming out. It actually comes out in about a month. It's called Attention Authors of Earth. And it's actually the story of a girl who is she's 13. She's an avid writer of science fiction. She watches science fiction movies and shows, and she writes science fiction, and she loves science fiction. She gets invited to an exclusive young science fiction writers conference, and she gets there all excited to learn how to finish her stories, to write that ending. And what she discovers instead, that it's actually a front for an alien invasion. And so anyway, it's a funny, laugh out loud science fiction in a writing world that's just a super fun story. And through the course of the events that happen, Paige, the main character, basically learns forgiveness. And there's some interesting things that happen that lead her to that place. But it's a fabulous story. We also have a contemporary story that's a mystery. It's called The Space Between Us, and it's about a girl whose horse gets stolen. And she lives in a rural place and is trying to mend bridges with her aunt and uncle who are raising her. And her horse goes missing. And through the events of the mystery of finding what happened to her horse, she draws closer to her family. She learns what it means to be part of a family and how her own self-worth is inherent, no matter who she is or where she is in her life. And so, really fun story. And I do have to say, all of our books have happy endings. So yes, she does find her horse. So, and then we have another one coming out. Our last one this fall will come out in November, and it is a lower middle grade fantasy, which is kind of hard to find. Most fantasy is upper middle grade, and all the other fantasy that we've published has been upper middle grade as well. Very complex worlds and scenarios. But this particular story, it's called Soledad and the Curse of the Phoenix, and it is set in a ancient Mesoamerican type setting. Very interesting setting in this story. And it's about finding the power of determination within yourself to do the things you have to do to overcome the bad things that are in your world around you. And Soledad, the main character, uses the power of music and the power of healing water to save her people. It's a really fun lower middle grade fantasy. So all three of those books are coming out this fall. And beyond that, we've got another year and a half already lined out. We publish 6 books a year, 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall. Our spring titles are all we're wrapping up the editing and the file production right now on those. Fantastic stories coming out way off into the horizon.
I'm looking forward to that. All of those books sound really, really fun. I'm looking forward to reading those. And I also wanted to share that I downloaded the Kindle version of Perfect, your book Perfect, and I started reading that, and it's really, really drawn me in. I'm excited to read that. So looking forward to those books coming out from your publishing company.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to what's coming out next year. And also, I have a lot to catch up on with your publishing company. So with all the books you've published in the past. So I'll be looking forward to reading some of those. And I want to close by saying thank you for coming. I feel like you have an overall theme of, in everything you do, reading, writing, of establishing this love of reading and writing and just connecting with it because of out of a love for it. And that's really what it's all about. And I appreciate the message that you are putting out there in your publishing company and with everything that you do. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for coming on this podcast. And it was really nice to meet you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Amber. I appreciate you inviting me on. And I definitely am passionate about what I do and just the general love of books and writing and reading and all of that.